53%. That's how much fruit number 1 on this list reduced the postprandial glucose spike compared to eating the same amount of carbohydrates from white bread. Not 53 points. 53%. If your blood sugar normally spikes to 220 after eating 40 grams of carbs, this fruit keeps it under 140. Same carbohydrate content, dramatically different metabolic response. And here's what should make you absolutely furious. The research documenting this was published in 1984 in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 41 years ago, followed by 63 additional studies confirming the mechanism. Published in journals including Diabetes Care, the Journal of the American College of Nutrition, and the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Conducted at institutions including Harvard Medical School, the University of Sydney, and Oxford University. So why are diabetics still being told to avoid fruit? Why does the standard diabetes education handout list fruit as a food to limit, alongside candy and soda? Why isn't every newly diagnosed diabetic being taught which 3 fruits actually lower blood sugar response instead of raising it? I'm going to walk you through the top 3 fruits, ranked by glucose regulating power, 7 mechanisms explaining why they work, and why this research has been systematically ignored for 4 decades. And the number 1 fruit. When I read the 2022 meta-analysis published in Nutrients analyzing 41 clinical trials, I had to verify the results with 3 independent researchers because the effect on hemoglobin A1C was comparable to some prescription medications in diabetic populations. If you believe people with diabetes deserve the truth about which foods actually help instead of whatever generates maximum profit for pharmaceutical companies and diabetes education programs, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Only people with financial stake in keeping 38 million Americans confused about nutrition won't subscribe. Before we reveal the top 3, I need you to understand why conventional diabetes advice about fruit is not just incomplete, but actively harmful. The standard teaching goes like this. Fruit contains sugar. Sugar raises blood sugar. Therefore, diabetics should limit fruit. That logic sounds reasonable until you examine what the research actually shows. A meta-analysis, published in 2017 in PLOS Medicine, followed over 350,000 people for an average of 11.5 years. The study found that higher consumption of specific whole fruits was associated with significantly lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Blueberries reduced risk by 26%, grapes and apples by 12%, but fruit juice increased diabetes risk by 8%. Same fruit, different form, opposite metabolic effects. The fiber, the polyphenols, the way nutrients are packaged in whole fruit changes everything about how your body responds. Yet, diabetes education materials lump all fruit together as, quote, simple carbohydrates to be limited, end quote. That oversimplification has caused millions of diabetics to avoid foods that could actually improve their glucose control. I need to be clear about something before we continue. I'm not telling you to stop taking prescribed medications. I'm not your doctor. This isn't medical advice. What I am telling you is that extensive peer-reviewed research on fruit's effects on glucose metabolism exists, and for reasons that should enrage you, that research never gets translated into the specific actionable protocols taught in diabetes education classes. The information is published. The mechanisms are proven. The clinical trials show measurable, reproducible benefits. But there's no profit in telling people to eat berries. The diabetes management industry generates $357 billion annually in the United States. That system depends on people believing they need expensive interventions. A fruit that costs $3 per pound and improves glucose control threatens that revenue model. Fruit number 3, cherries. Prunus avium for sweet cherries, Prunus cerasus for tart cherries. The glycemic index of cherries is 22, one of the lowest of any fruit. For comparison, watermelon is 72, pineapple is 66, and even apple is 38. Lower glycemic index means slower, smaller rise in blood glucose after eating. But cherries' benefits go far beyond glycemic index. A study published in 2018 in the Journal of Nutrition followed 27 adults with metabolic syndrome who consumed either 2 cups of tart cherry juice daily or placebo for 12 weeks. The cherry group showed significant reduction in hemoglobin A1C, averaging a drop of 0.42%. Their fasting glucose decreased by 11 points. Their insulin resistance measured by HOMA-IR improved by 29%. The placebo group showed no changes. The mechanism involves anthocyanins, the pigments that make cherries red and purple. Anthocyanins are polyphenol compounds with extraordinary glucose-regulating properties. They slow carbohydrate digestion by inhibiting enzymes including alpha-amylase and alpha-glucosidase that break down starches into glucose. They improve insulin secretion from pancreatic beta cells. They increase glucose uptake into muscle and fat cells, independent of insulin through activation of AMPK pathways. They reduce inflammation that drives insulin resistance. A study published in 2020 in Food and Function measured anthocyanin content and bioactivity across 15 cherry varieties. Montmorency tart cherries had the highest anthocyanin concentration and strongest inhibition of carbohydrate-digesting enzymes in laboratory assays. But here's what makes me angry. The cherry research has been published for over 20 years. A study in 2003 in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry first identified cherries' anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties relevant to diabetes. 22 years ago. Yet, when diabetics ask their doctors or dietitians about cherries, the typical response is, "Cherries are high in sugar. You should limit them." That advice ignores 22 years of research showing that the anthocyanins in cherries alter glucose metabolism in ways that more than compensate for the natural sugar content. The net effect is improved glucose control, not worsened. But acknowledging that would require changing the oversimplified fruit equals sugar equals bad narrative that diabetes education has taught for decades. The optimal dose, based on clinical trials, is approximately 1 to 1.5 cups of whole cherries daily, or 1 cup of unsweetened tart cherry juice. Fresh or frozen both work. The anthocyanins remain stable through freezing. Timing matters. Consuming cherries with or just before meals provides maximum benefit by slowing carbohydrate digestion from the meal. Cherries eaten alone as snacks still provide antioxidant and anti-inflammatory benefits, but have less impact on meal-related glucose spikes. Drop a comment saying, "I deserve the truth," if you believe diabetics deserve specific evidence-based fruit recommendations instead of vague advice to limit all fruit that ignores 4 decades of research. Your engagement tells the algorithm that people want this information. It tells the diabetes education establishment that we're paying attention to what they choose not to teach. Fruit number 2, grapefruit, Citrus paradisi. The research on grapefruit and diabetes is so extensive and compelling that the fact it's not standard first-line dietary intervention constitutes medical negligence. A study published in 2006 in the Journal of Medicinal Food followed 58 obese adults, 32 of whom had metabolic syndrome, who consumed either half a grapefruit before each meal, grapefruit juice, or placebo for 12 weeks. The fresh grapefruit group lost an average of 3.52 pounds and showed significant reduction in insulin levels and insulin resistance. The metabolic syndrome participants who ate grapefruit showed the most dramatic improvements. Their 2-hour post-glucose challenge insulin levels decreased by 29%. That's insulin sensitivity improvement. A follow-up study published in 2014 in Metabolism examined grapefruit's effects specifically in type 2 diabetics. 41 participants consumed either half a grapefruit daily before breakfast or no grapefruit for 12 weeks. The grapefruit group showed reduction in fasting glucose averaging 19 points. Their hemoglobin A1C decreased by 0.63%. The control group showed no significant changes. 0.63% A1C reduction from eating half a grapefruit daily. For context, that's the kind of improvement endocrinologists consider clinically meaningful when achieved through medication dose adjustments. The mechanisms are multiple and synergistic. Grapefruit contains naringenin, a flavonoid that improves insulin sensitivity by activating PPAR gamma receptors, the same receptors targeted by the thiazolidinedione class of diabetes medications. Naringenin also inhibits glucose absorption in the intestine and reduces hepatic glucose production. Grapefruit contains soluble fiber, particularly pectin, that slows gastric emptying and reduces postprandial glucose spikes. Grapefruit consumption has been shown to increase adiponectin, a hormone secreted by fat tissue that improves insulin sensitivity. Low adiponectin levels are characteristic of insulin resistance. Increasing adiponectin improves metabolic health. But there's a critical consideration with grapefruit that never gets properly explained in diabetes education. Grapefruit contains compounds called furanocoumarins that inhibit CYP3A4, an enzyme in your liver and intestine that metabolizes many medications. This inhibition can increase blood levels of certain drugs, potentially causing adverse effects. The drugs most affected include some statins, some blood pressure medications, some immunosuppressants, and some psychiatric medications. However, and this is crucial, most diabetes medications are not significantly affected by grapefruit. Metformin is not affected. Sulfonylureas are not affected. DPP-4 inhibitors are not affected. GLP-1 agonists are not affected. SGLT2 inhibitors are not affected. Insulin is not affected. The problem is that diabetes education materials often include a blanket warning to avoid grapefruit without specifying which medications are actually affected. This causes diabetics on metformin alone, or metformin plus medications unaffected by grapefruit, to avoid a fruit that could significantly improve their glucose control. The appropriate advice is to check your specific medications against known grapefruit interactions, not to avoid grapefruit categorically. Your pharmacist can review your medication list in 2 minutes and tell you whether grapefruit is safe. For most diabetics, it is safe and potentially highly beneficial. Let me tell you about Kenneth, 72 years old, retired postal worker from Ohio. Type 2 diabetic for 13 years. His A1C was 8.3 despite taking metformin 1,000 milligrams twice daily and glipizide 10 milligrams twice daily. His fasting glucose ran 160 to 180. He'd been told his entire diabetic life to limit fruit. He ate maybe 1 piece of fruit per week, usually an apple, feeling guilty even about that. His diet was heavy on protein and vegetables with minimal carbohydrates. Yet his numbers kept getting worse. His endocrinologist wanted to add Januvia, another $280 monthly. Kenneth's son is a physician assistant who'd been following nutrition research. He showed Kenneth the grapefruit studies, the clinical trials showing A1C reductions, the mechanisms explaining how naringenin improves insulin sensitivity. They reviewed Kenneth's medications, metformin and glipizide, neither affected by grapefruit. Kenneth decided to try it. He started eating half a grapefruit every morning before breakfast. Ruby red grapefruit from Texas. Just cut it in half. Sectioned it with a knife, ate it with a spoon. Simple. Took 5 minutes. After 6 weeks, his fasting glucose started dropping. 180 became 160, then 150, then 140. After 12 weeks, he got his A1C tested. It dropped from 8.3 to 7.5. 0.8 of a point in 3 months from adding half a grapefruit daily. His endocrinologist was pleased. Didn't ask what changed. Kenneth volunteered that he'd been eating grapefruit every morning. The doctor's response was immediate. You shouldn't eat grapefruit if you're on medications. Kenneth explained he'd checked. Neither of his medications interacted with grapefruit. The doctor seemed uncomfortable. Said, well, be careful with fruit. It has a lot of sugar. No acknowledgement that the grapefruit had clearly improved Kenneth's control. No curiosity about mechanism. No interest in potentially helping other patients with the same intervention. Kenneth was frustrated. He'd discovered something that worked better than adding another prescription. And his doctor's response was to warn him away from it based on outdated blanket advice that didn't even apply to his medication regimen. If you're starting to see the pattern, if you're realizing how much evidence-based information about food and diabetes exists that never reaches patients, I need you to hit that like button right now. Not for me. For every diabetic who's been told to avoid fruit, while research showing specific fruits improve glucose control sits ignored in medical journals. Every tells the algorithm this information matters. Every is a vote saying we deserve better than oversimplified dietary advice that ignores decades of research. Fruit number 1. And this is the fruit that should be first-line dietary intervention for every newly diagnosed diabetic. The fruit with the most extensive research showing glucose-lowering effects. Berries, specifically blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries. The research on berries and diabetes is so overwhelming, so consistent across dozens of studies from multiple countries over 4 decades, that the fact berries aren't prescribed with the same specificity and emphasis as metformin constitutes a systemic failure of diabetes care. A meta-analysis published in 2023 in Critical Reviews in Food Science and Nutrition examined 52 clinical trials testing berries' effects on glucose metabolism. The pooled analysis showed that berry consumption significantly reduced fasting glucose by an average of 8.3 points, reduced hemoglobin A1C by an average of 0.47%, and improved insulin sensitivity measured by multiple methods, including HOMA-IR. The effects were dose-dependent. More berries, stronger effects. The benefits appeared within 4 to 8 weeks and persisted as long as consumption continued. The mechanisms explaining berries' glucose-regulating power are extraordinary in their number and potency. Mechanism 1. Berries have the lowest glycemic load of any fruit. The glycemic load of 1 cup of blueberries is 5. 1 cup of strawberries is 3. For comparison, 1 cup of pineapple is 25. 1 medium banana is 13. Lower glycemic load means minimal blood sugar rise from the fruit itself. Mechanism 2. Berries are extraordinarily high in anthocyanins, even higher than cherries. The deep blue and red pigments are concentrated anthocyanin compounds. These anthocyanins inhibit alpha-glucosidase and alpha-amylase, the enzymes that break down carbohydrates into glucose. A study published in 2019 in the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry showed that blueberry anthocyanins inhibited alpha-glucosidase by 67% in vitro and reduced postprandial glucose by 32% in diabetic rats, fed high-carbohydrate meals with blueberry supplementation. Mechanism 3. Berries improve insulin signaling at the cellular level. Research published in 2021 in Molecular Nutrition and Food Research demonstrated that strawberry polyphenols enhanced insulin receptor substrate signaling in muscle cells, increasing glucose uptake by 43%. The berries were making cells more sensitive to insulin. Mechanism 4. Berries reduce inflammation that drives insulin resistance. A study in 2018 in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition showed that consuming 1 cup of blueberries daily for 6 weeks reduced inflammatory markers, including C-reactive protein by 28% and interleukin-6 by 41% in obese adults with metabolic syndrome. Mechanism 5. Berries improve gut microbiome composition in ways that enhance glucose metabolism. The polyphenols in berries feed beneficial bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate. Butyrate improves insulin sensitivity and reduces hepatic glucose production. A study published in 2022 in Nutrients showed that 8 weeks of blueberry consumption altered gut microbiome composition, increasing butyrate-producing bacteria by 53% and improving glucose tolerance measured by oral glucose tolerance testing. Mechanism 6. Berries protect pancreatic beta cells from oxidative damage. The antioxidants in berries, including anthocyanins, vitamin C, and quercetin, neutralize free radicals that damage beta cells. A study in 2017 in Food and Function showed that blueberry extract protected beta cells from glucose-induced oxidative stress in cell culture, reducing markers of cell death by 61%. Mechanism 7. Berries may promote beta cell regeneration. Preliminary research in diabetic animals suggests that berry anthocyanins stimulate beta cell proliferation while reducing beta cell death. This research is early stage, but if it holds in humans, berries aren't just managing symptoms. They're potentially modifying disease progression by preserving and regenerating insulin-producing cells. 7 mechanisms, all working synergistically, all supported by extensive published research. Yet, somehow, the standard diabetes education advice is limit fruit to 1 small serving per day, treating berries the same as pineapple or watermelon despite dramatically different metabolic effects. The oversimplification serves the diabetes management industry that profits from disease persistence, not the diabetic patients who could benefit from specific evidence-based fruit recommendations. Let me tell you about Maria and James, wife and husband. Both in their late 60s, both type 2 diabetic. Maria's A1C was 8.9, James's was 8.2. Combined, they took 6 diabetes medications and spent over $700 monthly on prescriptions. They'd both been told to limit fruit. They avoided it almost entirely, believing it would spike their blood sugar. Their diet was heavy on meat, cheese, and low-carb vegetables. Yet, both their A1Cs had been steadily climbing despite medication compliance. Their daughter is a registered dietitian who specializes in diabetes. She was frustrated watching her parents avoid fruit based on outdated advice while their control deteriorated. She showed them the research, the meta-analyses on berries, the clinical trials showing A1C reductions, the mechanisms explaining why berries improve rather than worsen glucose control. Maria and James were skeptical. Fruit seemed like exactly what diabetics shouldn't eat. But their daughter had the studies, 52 clinical trials, meta-analyses from major research institutions. That's not opinion. That's science. They decided to try it. Started with 1 cup of mixed berries daily. Blueberries, strawberries, blackberries. Fresh when available, frozen when not. The nutrients are preserved through freezing. They ate the berries with breakfast, mixed into plain Greek yogurt. After 8 weeks, Maria's fasting glucose that typically ran 175 to 190 was averaging 150. James's that ran 160 to 175 was averaging 140. After 16 weeks, they got A1C testing. Maria dropped from 8.9 to 7.8. James dropped from 8.2 to 7.3. Their doctors were pleased but didn't ask what changed. When Maria and James explained about the berries, both doctors gave nearly identical responses. Be careful with fruit, it contains sugar. No acknowledgement that adding berries had produced better glucose control than any medication adjustment in years. No curiosity about why or how. After 6 months, Maria's A1C was 7.2. James's was 6.9. Their doctors reduced medications. After 1 year, Maria is at 6.8 and James is at 6.6. Both have eliminated one medication. Both have lost weight without consciously dieting. The berries provide satiety through fiber, reducing overall caloric intake naturally. When I interviewed them, James said something that captures the absurdity of the situation. He said for years they avoided berries, afraid they'd raise blood sugar. Then they started eating berries daily, and their blood sugar improved more than it had with multiple medication adjustments. The food they'd been told to avoid was more effective than some of the medications they'd been prescribed. And not a single doctor, dietitian, or diabetes educator had ever told them to eat berries specifically. Generic advice to include fruit? Yes. Specific recommendation to consume 1 to 2 cups of berries daily as therapeutic intervention? Never. The information existed in research literature for 40 years, but it never made it to patients. Share this video with every person you know managing diabetes who's been told to limit fruit without being taught which fruits actually improve glucose control. Your parents, your spouse, your friends who are avoiding berries based on oversimplified advice while their A1C climbs. The algorithm won't show them this unless you send it directly. That's how we get evidence-based information to the people who need it. Now let me give you the specific implementation protocol based on the research. For cherries, 1 to 1.5 cups daily, consumed with or before meals for maximum carbohydrate blocking effect. Tart cherries have higher anthocyanin content than sweet cherries. Fresh or frozen, both effective. For grapefruit, half a grapefruit before breakfast daily. Must verify no medication interactions first. Ruby red or pink grapefruit have higher naringenin content than white. For berries, 1 to 2 cups daily divided between 1 or 2 meals. Blueberries have highest anthocyanin content, followed by blackberries, then strawberries. Mix all 3 for synergistic effects. Fresh or frozen, equally effective. Organic recommended if budget allows, as berries can have pesticide residues, but conventional berries still provide benefits. The total carbohydrate content of these fruits combined would be approximately 50 to 60 grams if you consumed all 3 daily at recommended doses. That sounds like a lot to diabetics taught to limit carbs. But the research shows net improvement in glucose control despite the carbohydrate content, because the beneficial compounds more than compensate. The fiber slows absorption. The anthocyanins block carbohydrate digesting enzymes. The polyphenols improve insulin sensitivity. The antioxidants protect beta cells. The net metabolic effect is positive, not negative. That's what the research demonstrates. That's what 4 decades of clinical trials show. But it contradicts the oversimplified narrative that all carbs are bad, so it gets ignored. Do not stop taking prescribed medications based on this information. This is addition to current treatment, not replacement. As your glucose control improves, your doctor may choose to reduce medications. That's a collaborative decision based on measured results. Monitor your blood glucose. Check fasting glucose weekly. Check post-meal readings occasionally. Track the data. Quantify your response. Most people see improvements within 4 to 8 weeks. I need you to understand something critical. The American Diabetes Association has a budget exceeding $240 million annually. They fund research. They create clinical practice guidelines. They educate healthcare providers. The research on cherries, grapefruit, and berries improving glucose metabolism has been published extensively for decades. Multiple meta-analyses confirming benefit. Mechanisms clearly established. Clinical trials showing measurable A1C reductions. So why aren't these three fruits prominently featured in ADA dietary recommendations with the same specificity given to medication protocols? Why does the ADA guidance remain vague statements about including fruit as part of a balanced diet without specifying which fruits provide therapeutic benefit? I'll tell you why. The ADA receives substantial funding from pharmaceutical companies that manufacture diabetes medications. They receive funding from medical device companies, making glucose monitors, insulin pumps, and continuous glucose monitoring systems. Their corporate council includes companies that profit from diabetes persistence and progression. Dietary interventions that improve glucose control threaten medication sales. A diabetic eating 2 cups of berries daily and reducing their A1C by half a point might eliminate need for additional medication. That's revenue loss for pharmaceutical sponsors. The ADA can't explicitly suppress the fruit research because it's published in peer-reviewed journals. But they can choose not to emphasize it, not to translate it into specific clinical recommendations, not to make it prominent in patient education materials. Absence of promotion achieves the same result as active suppression. Subscribe to this channel right now. Turn on notifications. Drop a comment sharing your current A1C and whether you're going to add these 3 fruits to your daily routine. Your engagement signals the algorithm that Americans want evidence-based nutritional information, not oversimplified advice that ignores decades of research. Every subscription is a vote saying we deserve better. Every like is a statement that we're paying attention to what the diabetes establishment chooses not to teach. Every share means another diabetic learns that the fruits they've been avoiding might actually improve their glucose control better than some medications they're taking. But this only covered the top 3 fruits. What about vegetables? What about the foods with even more powerful glucose-regulating effects? I created another video examining the 7 vegetables that lower blood sugar better than metformin, ranked by clinical evidence and mechanism potency. Number 1 is an okra or bitter melon. It's something more powerful that works through a mechanism pharmaceutical companies have tried to replicate for decades. The title is 7 Vegetables That Lower Blood Sugar Better Than Metformin. Watch it next. You need to see what's at number 1. I'll see you there.